In the panel, we have BuzzFeed White House reporter Evan McMorris-Santoro, Democratic strategist Basil Smikle Jr., and Republican pollster Kellyanne Conway. So, look, this started actually, I think that we'll set this up by talking, by having a quote here from Chris Christie. So Christie and Cuomo and then Pat Quinn out in Illinois instituted these mandatory 21-day quarantines on Friday. Now we have this patient speaking out and saying, you know, not only does she not like her own treatment, she is basically saying she thinks this will discourage other aid workers, other health workers from going over to West Africa where the virus is really out of control. Christie's response to this is from yesterday. He said that my heart goes out to her because she's someone who's been trying to help others and is obviously ill. Question mark there how ill she is because she's so far tested negative for Ebola. But then Christie continues and says, my first and foremost obligation is to protect the public health and safety of the people of New Jersey. So I'm sorry if in any way she was inconvenienced, but inconvenience that could occur from having folks that are symptomatic and ill out amongst the public is a much, much greater concern of mine. Just curious what you guys think of this. Have the governments that are doing this overreacted?
This isn't going to work, what Chris Christie just said. You can't have people coming back and being treated the way this woman said that she was treated, and then sent to the hospital the way she was in armored cars or wherever, you know, in the caravan, and getting only a granola bar. I mean, this is a point where we're supposed to be seeing government doing the right thing and having sort of processes in place to deal with stuff like this. And this quarantine thing is not it's not a confidence booster that they have no idea of what they're doing. And I don't think sort of Chris Christie's sort of standard, you know, look, just deal with it. We're dealing, you know, it's my thing, you got to deal with it. I just don't think this is going to work here. I mean, this is the same problem that Obama's had in the White House. I mean, people want to see the government acting and acting well right now, and this is not a story of the government acting well.
Well, it raises, to me, there's a lot of questions. One is just logistical, though, right? Like, if this applies to New York, to New Jersey, it applies to Chicago, it applies to O'Hare, but it doesn't apply to Dulles, it doesn't apply to some of these other airports, then, you know, you can fly back into New York and you could be subject to the quarantine, or you can fly back in anywhere else in the country and then drive back to New York and no one's ever going to check. Right. It seems like it opens the door to that.
Well, they had to start somewhere, and these governors, let's remember the information on which they were dealing when they enacted these quarantines, they being Governors Cuomo and Christie of New York and New Jersey, respectively. It happened the day after this doctor was seen to have Ebola here in New York, and people did freak out. People are worried about that. And, you know, security mom has returned if, in fact, she'd ever received it. She's getting concerned. She doesn't feel safe. And, Steve, part of it is because people just don't know. They don't know what they don't know about this, and they're willing to admit that. So they are looking for some government response. To answer your question, has government overreacted? Is it overreach? We don't know that yet. I'm very grateful that it looks like Dr. Spencer will recover. I'm very grateful this nurse has tested negative. But I think you have to credit these governors for operating on the information, receiving all these calls from their constituents where people are genuinely nervous, and at least trying to be visible and vocal about it and do something. Will it work ultimately? I'm not sure. But was it a reasonable response based on the information they had at that time, meaning the day before? Probably.
Yeah, so Basil, how do you think the public is receiving this? I mean, because there's the story of the Ebola patient in New York City, and then there was, I could see some confusion there in terms of the messages people are getting, because on the one hand, they're being told that he was very responsible and he was self-quarantining and all that, but then on the other hand, oh no, wait, he was on the subway, he was at the High Line, he was at the bowling alley. You shouldn't worry about that, but we're imposing a quarantine. So people, I don't think people quite know how to, what do you think the public...
I think that's absolutely right. And just, you know, Dr. Spencer actually lives within a short walking distance from where I live. And so his neighbors, my neighbors, were on camera reacting to this and saying, how did he not self-quarantine? He's a doctor, he should know better. He should know better than to go out on the subway and go out to restaurants and bowling alleys. And I think there are a lot of New Yorkers that feel exactly the same way.
You live near him, and your neighbor. The reaction in your neighborhood is basically he acted irresponsibly.
He acted irresponsibly, and if you think, look, if you think about New York, I mean, especially being on the subway, it's a very intimate experience. And I think when you're looking at people, the number of people that live here, the number of people that go through this city, I think there are a lot of folks that are very nervous. I don't know if the joint governors measure will actually solve some of that problem and lessen the panic. And what I find interesting is that with the Cuomo de Blasio response, which was forthright, it looked like government was working and people were being trained, and it was somewhat measured, that this response that the mayor and the federal government did not seem to be privy to beforehand, that it actually may do a lot more harm in terms of causing panic and causing a little bit more hysteria than it was intended to.
And it's worth adding here, too, that the real Ebola crisis is in Africa. And making it harder to get American medical expertise to Africa to help with the Ebola crisis over there will keep Ebola going for longer and more cases of it coming here. So, I mean, I think that we're seeing a lot of panic going on right now. And when governors start to do it, I think people should be worried about it.
But on the positive side, we are deploying many more resources, money and personnel to West Africa to help. So this has raised the profile of the problem, thankfully. And I just want to say, in any situation like this, Steve, the question is always, what is the burden to the individual versus the risk to others or to the larger population, which that person is a member. And I think that's what some of these governors are balancing. I would note, because it's just curious to me, that it's not a partisan issue at all. You've got 2 Republican governors and 2 Democratic governors, 3 of whom are up for re-election this year. But I would...
That's partisan.
Right, no, it does no coincidence at all. Pat Quinn in one of the closest races in the country, and Pat Quinn. I want to talk about also the response from the Obama administration, from the national government, because a point you were just making, Kelly, I want to pick up on in the next block. There was an interesting quote from David Axelrod about Barack Obama and his leadership that I think relates to this crisis. I want to tell you what that quote is and talk about it a little bit when we come back.